From a patient's perspective, when I look at 1284, my first question is how come it doesn't address patients? And what I mean by that is the safety, the consistency, the cost components of what we incur. So for example, I always wanted to see voluntary testing, not necessarily required testing, but I think as a patient, what that would do for me is it gives me a choice of, do I want to go to a dispensary that actually gives me the information I need, or do I want to go to a dispensary where I'm experimenting, if you will, all the time? Mm-hmm. So from a patient's perspective, in my own experience, it took me 2 years, if you will, to learn what actually started to work for me. Whereas if we were able to provide this information through some sort of guideline, then the patients would be able to make that decision within 2 days or 2 weeks even. So my first and foremost concern is really about the patients and our needs. I agree that we need regulation of some sort, of guidelines of some sort, but I really think that that needs to include the dialogue with the patients.
Yeah, that seems fair.
So up till now, it's been really law enforcement who's been engaged in the conversation. And I call SB 1284 the speed trap, in that law enforcement developed the law to generate money for themselves.
Yeah.
And so I see this sort of circular thing going on that side. What would you recommend, or how do you envision taking it from where it is today and actually including some of those concerns?
You know, I don't know yet, Jason, that I'm in a point to give recommendations of where to go from here. I will give it some thought, and if I develop some ideas, I'll let you know. I think what's going to happen with 1284 is parts of it will be ruled to be constitutional, parts will be ruled not to be constitutional, and the legislature is then going to have to decide where do we want to come back and try to fix it and amend it as we go forward. Whereas I indicated, there may be a process over the next few years of people saying, why are we spending all this time on this issue when we should be putting it into schools or public safety issues? That could happen. I think it's going to be a really interesting evolution over the next few years between the legal interaction and the public discourse about medical marijuana. So it'll change. Where it'll end up, I don't know.
One of the things, and you brought this up earlier about allowing local municipalities to have local rule, if you will. I noticed that, or not noticed, but I saw that, I think her name was Pam, in Broomfield had initiated a signature drive to put the ban that they had back on the ballot to allow possibly dispensaries in Broomfield. Do you see that as the most powerful initiative for the citizens to take at this point to move forward, if you will, to allow dispensaries in some of
It's going to be really interesting to see what happens with that. And I think watching this, you know, I served on a school board for 8 years, so I know a lot about local politics. Nobody feels political heat like a city council person or a school board member who they're very in touch with the communities. And I don't know the people in Broomfield on the council there, but I can bet they're watching very closely to see whether they misgauged where the community was at on these issues. So yeah, I think that's real important.
I've got a ton more questions for you, and I hope eventually we can have some more dialogue together. But I'll finish up with this last question, and that is, what is the relationship between you and Matt Cook at this point? Have you spoken with him? Have you had any dialogue?
I have not spoken with Matt, but I have a lot of respect for him. I've heard a lot of good things about him. I read his interview in Cush Magazine last month, and one thing we have in common is I'll be in Cush Magazine this month with Jared Polis. So I intend to have a very productive and positive relationship with Matt. What I've liked about Matt as I've watched him is that I think he's really tried to dialogue with the medical marijuana community and try to have a productive discussion. Where that goes in the future, we'll have to figure it out. But you know, I got very tired of watching law enforcement people kind of ignoring the reality of medical marijuana, and again, kind of like my opponent, just wanting to turn the clock back to the mid-'70s and treat marijuana as it was then. Right. Matt seems to be realistic about what the law is and about his responsibilities to make it work. We'll see where it goes from there.
Great. Thank you very much. Do you have any statements that you'd like to make to the cannabis community in Colorado, or then?
Well, let me just say this, Jason. I appreciate any support any of the folks watching this can give me. I need as many votes as I can get. It's a tough election. It's a tough year to be a Democrat, to be a progressive Democrat in particular. But I've run into people across the state that are really excited about my candidacy and focusing on real people and real issues, and this is one of them. So let me just say this. My cell phone, which you know, is 303-668-3113. Anybody who wants to talk to me, give me a call, go to my website, send me an email, because I want to keep the dialogue going.
Great. Matt Cook from the Department of Revenue just released the information that patients have to wait 35 days to get their medicine. If I were a pain patient and my physician prescribed me Oxycontin, I can go pick that up instantly downstairs at the pharmacy. What is your opinion on my having to wait for 35 days to get cannabis for the same situation?
Well, I know what I've read in the papers on that issue, and I can certainly understand the concern. I haven't talked to Matt Cook about it. I don't know what his legal basis is for tying, for requiring the 35-day wait period. But I would be concerned about it, just like I'd be concerned about the $90 fee and some other things that treat. The problem is, if you accept the premise, which I think you must, because it's in the Constitution, that marijuana has a medical use, then you've got to figure out how do we make it available to people for medical purposes. And the more hurdles you put in the way of it that you don't need for morphine-based painkillers or other things, the more it seems to be inconsistent with the framework of Amendment 20. But I haven't talked to Matt about it. I don't know what his thinking is. And so I'll say I'm concerned, but in a preliminary way.
You make me think of something else, and I'll just add this on there. Sure. From a personal needs standpoint, if a person in pain or somebody who suffers from MS or whatever the ailment may be, glaucoma, diabetes, so on and so forth, when that patient needs to take their medicine, traditionally they would go and open their bottle of ibuprofen or Oxycontin or some blood thinner or whatever it might be, and they would take it when they need it. Unfortunately, cannabis patients in Colorado are under this requirement right now where we have to medicate in our own home. But as a patient, we are traveling around, we have to work, we go visit people and so on and so forth. And pain is something that we can't schedule, or diabetes is not something we can schedule in terms of keeping control of our sugar levels. So what is your opinion on that general issue with patients, and do you see potentially down the road where we would be able to medicate anywhere?
Well, I certainly understand the concern, and I think that's just one more area where you're going to see adjustment and modification. This is a continuing dialogue. Look how far we've come since January of last year. You're going to continue to see, I think, a more practical application of Amendment 20 to patients, and you'll continue to see, I think, progression of the discussion about marijuana on a policy level as the community gets more and more used to it. Certainly, your point, which is a very fair point, is if you're going to treat it, it's going to be for medical purposes, then why treat it with a lot more restrictions than you would have for other medication? It's a very fair point.
And I know a lot of people would be sort of questioning in my saying this, but I do feel comfortable with saying I do support your campaign.
Great.
And I really hope that I can do whatever I can to get you elected.
Well, I really appreciate that, Jason. It means a lot. And I'll tell you one thing that people should know, and that is I'm absolutely committed to government that works, that actually helps the community. It's efficient, it's transparent, and it does what it's supposed to do, and it leaves everything else alone. So I appreciate your support. It means a lot to me.
Thanks a lot, Stan. I appreciate that. Thanks for your time.
Yep.